very warm welcome and welcome back to Edie Extra, live from the Collaboration Hub here at the Edie 26 conference in central London. This is the place to be for you all to learn about navigating some of the hottest topic in sustainable business right now. We're bringing our long-standing Edie Extra podcast to life here at the Business Design Centre, recording short and snappy panel discussions that look to the horizon to discuss the next big trends facing corporate sustainability teams. For today, let me introduce myself and our panellists. I'm Sarah, I'm the content editor at Edie, and joining me for a discussion about the evolving role of the sustainability professional and the sustainability department and what that means about upskilling and reskilling. I'm delighted to be joined by Lloyd from Climate School. He is a UK and US country launcher. And Dr Ariel Edesses, who leads climate strategy at Dickinson. So thank you both very much for taking the time to be on this stage. And as a sort of introductory question, do feel free to introduce yourselves as well. My starter for 10 question is, what do you believe the role of a Chief Sustainability Officer actually is in 2026?
Well, I'll start. I think the introduction was fine, so thank you for having me. I think more than the title of the role, it's really about focusing on impact first. There is a need to have that senior ownership, whether that's kind of a CSO title, which does work really well in some organizations, or whether it works better for an organization to have sustainability embedded, as long as it's embedded somewhere that has that broad reach. So it's starting with that impact focus and then a good balance of senior ownership, embedding capability. I think one thing that there is a risk is if you've got somebody in where sustainability sits with one person or in one team, there is a bit of a risk that it's siloed or kind of put off to, oh, this isn't my job. Whereas if it's embedded really well but doesn't have that good senior ownership, then you might lose momentum. So it's really about having that balance about both ownership, maybe it's a CSO role, maybe it's something else, and embedding capability across business.
So in brief, their role is to really own this, to focus on impact and to make sure that they're properly supported.
Exactly. I mean, it's really about how do you balance both of those things, making it part of everybody's role, but still having really clear accountability.
And Celli?
Yeah, I always use the example that I feel the sustainability transition is no different to the IT transition that happened 30 years ago, where a company who wanted to go online at that time, everyone needed to know how to use a computer, and we still have a IT person who's the chief of IT today, even though everyone's still using computers and have integrated IT into their general role. I feel the same is going to happen with sustainability, that as we're setting goals of net zero or nature or biodiversity or water or whatever it might be, we'll still need someone at the top who's thinking strategically of where it's going, but they're not going to be on the sales call every time like they were maybe a few years ago. And that's where sustainability is really coming into every person's role around.
Got it. And Celli, you obviously work with a lot of businesses across the UK, across the US, and beyond on staff reskilling, upskilling, etc. So when you go to them, how is sustainability usually laid out? Do they tend to still have a dedicated department or at least that dedicated person?
Yeah, they've always got a department. I like saying department because it's usually a department of one, but maybe it might be a few more people. But the real thing is about how the job will evolve. Like a really good example would be Porsche. So Porsche, the car manufacturer, and 2024 there was a huge flood which took out an aluminium supply. As a result, Porsche did a profit warning and they said, listen, we're not going to be able to sell as many cars because we don't have this aluminium part. Now, as a result, there was a huge market share drop in Porsche, not just because of this, it was because Porsche was not ready for this adaptation. They weren't adapted to the supply chain changes. So the question is, whose job was it? Like, was it the head of sustainability who should have thought, hey, do we only have one supplier of aluminium? Or was it the procurement person whose job it is to make sure that they can procure the services that are needed? And in this case, it means for that procurement person, they really had three options. Option one was, if they've only got one supplier of aluminium, do they A, go to that company and say, listen, what is your adaptation strategy? How resilient are you to climatic events? B, they say, okay, instead we at Porsche are going to stockpile a whole lot of aluminium parts, so if an event happened, we're ready. Or 3, we're going to look around at other companies that can provide aluminium in this case. But either way, it shouldn't be the head of sustainability who's making those calls. And this is just one example of how sustainability is starting to integrate more and more into people's roles. But the roles are still going to be there. But the head of sustainability is the person who's saying we should start thinking about not just us, but our supply chains, adaptation measures, or resilience in this case.
So you've mentioned there the need to upskill procurement, but I'm sure that a lot of businesses are also looking at the need to upskill other functions that are not directly tied to sustainability, and we at Edie hear that quite often in terms of due diligence and sustainability reporting and compliance. So, Ariel, how do they need to upskill, and how can they work a bit more collaboratively to avoid the sort of situation we've just talked about?
I think reporting has been a big driver for needing to upskill, starting with our carbon baselining. When I first started, one of the first projects was we need to measure our emissions. So right away, you have to gather data across functions. So we need data from HR or operations or finance, and that you're pulling together data that's not traditionally pulled together. Mm-hmm. But I think what we realize is that this exercise can just be a go out, collect data, bring it in, or it can be an opportunity to engage with people, explain why you need this piece of data. Take commuting as a piece of data collection, which we need to report on. You can just send out information, take it in, and leave it there. Or what we tried to do is turn it into an opportunity to tell a story, explain what we're doing, get our people involved. We even created an animation out of the data. And it meant that over year on year, we saw a much bigger engagement. We actually got 80% of people to respond to that survey. I actually think more than reporting, the change has been in the expectations, because reporting is a bit all over the place. It's not that consistent. It's unclear. And at the moment, it's not actually the biggest driver, but it's kind of the expectations coming from our clients or just the market that's making the biggest difference. So we've kind of worked really hard on engagement. Has always been a strategy for us, which is where we work with Climate School to do lots and lots of training. But the piece of training that I think has made the biggest difference from a reporting angle is where we have now worked with job-specific training sessions. So we do e-learning. Right now it's across our central services, but everybody will do their own role-specific training session online. But then they come together in this interactive face-to-face workshop where we get up and we move around, we work together. And what it means is that reporting requirement and sort of need for good due diligence and high rigor and high transparency in the level of reporting, but it can come to life in their roles day to day, as opposed to me just going out and saying, send me this piece of data. So it does mean that in the end, we report what we are actually doing rather than doing work in order to just report on it.
Yeah, and we know that this sort of compliance-only mindset is leading to reporting fatigue. So at the beginning of the year, we surveyed online about 200 senior sustainability professionals and asked them, what do you spend a lot of time on now that you don't see yourself spending a lot of time on in 5 years or so? And reporting was top of that list. A lot of people said, I'd really hope that in 5 years the finance function could do it, the risk and compliance team could do it, that digital tools will be better, so I'll spend less time on that. So I wanted to get your feeling, given as well what you said about a lot of teams being really small, sometimes one people. Are people really able to share their workload with other functions at the moment, or because of a skills gap, does it tend to come back to them anyway and create that bottleneck? Where are we at in terms of sharing the load?
It's a really, really good question. I think we always have to take, when you're thinking about, okay, we need to engage or upskill or look at our company, you've got to think about resources. You've got to think about yourself. Like if you're a team of one and you've got one person, then you've got to think about, okay, as a result, what is my priority for this year? Maybe it's not doing my whole sales team on X. Maybe it's really focusing on my procurement team. The second part is for every company, there's always a sector group that's probably linked. Like I know for the law, the legal sector, there's the NZLA who are all together and you can share because it's one of those areas where collaboration kind of works. But there's also, of course, we are a service provider, but a lot of the time it's asking what kind of resources are out there that might suit you. I think the key point is that there's no silver bullet. Like there's no, this will do it for every single company. It's really sitting down and being like, okay, we're a small company that's spread around these kind of areas, then maybe e-learning works. Or maybe we're one company in one site and everyone there doesn't have a computer, and really the best thing to do would get everyone in on a day and talking about it. So you've got to work out what kind of resources you've got, what resources you personally in terms of your time management and how much time you've got, because a lot of people coming into sustainability haven't come from an L&D background. They've come from maybe a science background or maybe a business, and they've put the hat of green finance now on. So it's really working out what is your experience, what can you do, and how much time you've got, and then what resources there are that you could use to utilize it.
Ariel, any further thoughts on, avoiding bottlenecks and sharing the load?
I think it can go a lot of ways, but I think that point on there is no one-size-fits-all solution. But I think where it really depends is where an organization invests in building that capability. Because, again, it can be a really small team. But if you can, whoever it is in that team brings it back to that role that somebody does. Again, I can point to our training, these in-person workshops, so the teams can actually own the outcome. The sustainability person, me, might come in and kind of set guardrails or set expectations, but if they really understand why it matters to their role, then they can start thinking about sustainability-linked solutions for reasons that aren't necessarily sustainability labeled. So it might be around the reducing costs or energy efficiency or managing risks or whatever really matters in their role. Then they start to understand how that also links to sustainability, and then the actual time and resource can be spread around, because it might be the case where it's not continuously coming back to whoever the sustainability team is, but the work is being picked up somewhere else, almost without the knowledge of the sustainability team, because it's just that deeply embedded.
I think on that as well, unlike the digital transformation with getting everyone to understand GDPR, there's no person out there being like, oh my God, I can't wait to do the new GDPR training. But there are in sustainability, there are lots of people in the organization who are green, who are keen to get started and utilizing that. And so we work with quite a few companies. One that's got over 200,000 staff, and they've released some of their sustainability training, and they've used that to find out who in the company are the first ones to do it, and then contacting them being like, listen, we've seen you've done this training in procurement, looks like this is something you're interested in. How can I support you to getting more green skills in procurement so that you can kind of take on the ownership of that role?
So we've talked about a couple of things that come up quite often in these conversations. So translating things into the language of other teams, making sure they understand their why, their benefits, and then finding the people that are really keen. But there are any other key ingredients of effective sustainability upskilling for non-sustainability teams? So Celli, maybe you in general, and then maybe for you, why do workshops work so well in that regard?
So I think the big part is it has to come with communication. Like if you just release sustainability training or a platform or a thing in the side without framing it as why you're doing it, you're just going to get those 15% who are already green. You've got to be able to think about what is the language that people listen to. It could be risk, it could be we've got to do this because of making our supply chain more resilient, it could be to make sure that our greenwashing we're not going to be accused of greenwashing. It could be an opportunity when you're talking to your sales team. You have to think about the language and then frame it in that as the communication to getting people to think about why you're doing sustainability. It's not just the moral reason anymore for a lot of people. Although it works for most of us here, we morally agree that we should be doing it, but we have to get everyone to understand that this is actually a business need. And we're in a business and our business is changing, and how do we communicate that?
Yeah, on the why do workshops work, I think it comes back to the, sitting there and learning on your own, doing e-learning is effective. I think the content is really good. People start sessions from a basis because they've done lots of training. But until you actually sit in a room and sort of connect on a human level, it's a much more effective way to bring what you've learned into your role and own it. I think you've talked about it needs to be spoken within the language of that role. So without doing these, interactive brainstorming sessions based on the learning that people have done, you're just not going to kind of get that connection. If we just did that e-learning and then went away without seeing this collective, this is something that we're all in together, I just don't think it would be nearly as effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and the same is you don't want to waste time when everyone's together explaining a topic which they should have already known to be able to, like, everyone should be coming to that class together to be able to already be discussing the business need and where it is, already knowing the content. So it has to be doing these two parts. Completely agree.
And then beyond, like, say, your first workshop or your initial training, how do you make sure that businesses you work with are set up to check in on this? Basically, it could be easy to tick it, do it, and then, people don't forget a workshop that quickly, but after a few years they will. So how can businesses put the structure in for continual refreshers and check-ins to make sure that the momentum and the accountability doesn't just go flat?
I think it's the same with, like, if you're, electrify your car suite. Okay, we've done that. Let's move on. But training your staff or upskilling your staff is a yearly thing. And so you have to think about it often is, okay, by 2030 we've got a public target. Therefore, I need everyone to know X by 2028, and then therefore 2027 they know. And then so thinking about it, okay, what do they need to know now in the amount of time that we've got to get them started in that movement, and thinking about it that way. But at the same time, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. You've got to just start something. Start it, try it out, measure the need, measure the response, and be able to tweak it the following year. But you have to be thinking about doing something each year. And as a result, the key point is, like, you're a sustainability team. You're very lucky that there's also a HR team who usually has an L&D section to it. Ask them. Their job is training. Their job is, like, how do you train people in that company? So asking them, like, hey, can I know, like, when you did GDPR or when you did your anti-bribery, what worked, what didn't? And they might say, this worked, this format. And you're like, okay, I'm going to look at our sustainability training in the same kind of way. And our comms team, making sure when they're talking about X, how do we make sure that the sustainability is talked about in the same way so it's all homogenous within the company?
I think, that homogeneity is what I wanted to stay on, because I think we've touched on this before. You said sometimes teams might go away and know certain things or do certain things, but not everyone's always on the same page and knows about things. So we've talked about risks to business internally, of things falling flat, not meeting targets, but there's increasing external risk, which we've touched on. So in addition to non-compliance with disclosure requirements, there's also greenwashing related risk or impact washing related risks and changing expectations. So Ariel, I wanted to get your view on whether these communication lapses or people not being on the same page really are a material risk for businesses.
I think it's a real challenge. Climate and sustainability are really inherently complex, and there's so much to them. So I think some of the biggest risks really come from that language and literacy, and if you're not all sort of speaking the same language, or at least having the similar, understanding of what things mean, people may say the wrong thing, but they're not meaning to say it. And that is when you do potentially run into greenwashing risks, or it can affect credibility. So I think having that shared understanding about terminology, like science-based targets is one we throw around all the time, but to actually bring it to what does this mean? What is the definition of net zero? That's something that I think needs to be clarified. We need to be clear on how we're presenting it, what it means, and that needs to be pretty consistent across the business. So I think having that clarity of language and just continual communication needs to be very high up on the list of priorities for somebody who is a sustainability professional. And I think that's kind of like climate and sustainability in general, being able to communicate this very vast topic, but make it mean something to people individually and today. What does it mean today to you? This is too broad of a thing, so I need to be working on telling a story that's meaningful in each person's role. So really focusing on clarity of language, building that literacy to use certain terms, and then bringing it down to not just focusing on the what are we doing, but the so what? Why does this matter to us? And really focusing on using that clear terminology, but meeting people where they are. Yeah.
I think you said at the start about greenwashing. I think greenwashing is a really interesting one because everyone always focuses on the marketing and comms team. They're like, well, we need to train them to make sure they know about greenwashing. Where in reality, there's so many more people, like as in there's definitely the procurement team. Why? Well, they're often the victims of greenwashing. Like the procurement team's trying to look out for a product that's going to reduce their carbon emissions, and if they're not able to look at the right terminology, they'll be affected. There's the sales team, there's the people going to the board to make sure that they're communicating on the right part. So it needs to be done collaboratively, not just as a silo of like, okay, marketing you've had. Obviously the marketing team will need a little bit more training than the others, but everyone needs to understand what the terms mean.
I think we could honestly do another episode just on this. But I am watching the clock and I'm conscious that we're nearly out of time and we've covered a lot of ground. We've also got people here that will probably be looking for something to add to their notebook as an action item, something to take away and do. So with everything that we've discussed in mind, what actions would you give to people that are listening to take away and do to essentially be more impactful or be mindful of their skills?
So I think the first action is to start with a framework that makes sense to you. I mean, I think this is where reporting is helpful, using especially the UK SRS Sustainability Reporting Standards, or ISSB, finding a framework that's clear, that makes sense. I actually found the Transition Plan Task Force Disclosure Framework website very helpful. They've got a lot of really good resources. And that's not to say go find the framework and then do all the things, but find it so that you can understand what does this big picture look like, and then use that to like make your extremely long list of actions. But I think that once you've done that, the next thing is to just pick like one thing every day. Pick one action or one decision or just even one conversation to have so that you have that baby step within the bigger picture to focus on. And then I think my second action point, which is connected to that, is not to get into the woo-woo side of things, but sometimes just to stop and take a deep breath, to be present and kind of bring yourself back to that moment, because you're battling this kind of short-term baby steps with this giant picture, with all of these different things around how do you bring a whole organization along, how can you build capability, and sometimes you just have to focus on yourself and do that thing to keep going. It's a very long journey that we're on, and so I think having that sort of personal capacity is really worth remembering.
I was going to say something completely different, but hearing that, I could not agree more. There's a part about your own capacity, and when you're looking at it, you've got your own motivation. I feel like with your spheres of influence, you've got as a globe or as a country, you can vote, you can do things like that. As a personal, it's like what you can do with your family and around, and then you've got your work and what you can do with your workplace. And sometimes if you're having battles at work, it's sometimes good to spend some time at home and try win some battles there and then come back with the same kind of energy. But in terms of like what would be like my one thing to start thinking about in terms of how do you engage your employees or your supply chain is firstly look at your audience. Like who have you got? So worked out like how many people do I have? Are they all in the same location? No, they're indifferent, therefore it'll be this. Then I can look at, okay, how has training been done before? So line up a call with someone in your HR team or your comms team and say, listen, can we have a chat because I'd love to know how you've done this previously. Then work out, okay, so I've got all this information, what's my capacity, and taking it from there. Do I have capacity to do everyone this year with a small thing, or am I going to just focus on my finance team to be able to understand X? Once you've got that, the last thing I'd say is go and talk to people. I mean, like I'm doing a plug because I work in sustainability engagement, but come talk to us, come to other providers. Like that's our job. So come for advice. You don't have to, take us, but like come for advice on how they're done, or go to other groups that are doing things in your area and find out how people are trying to do the same kind of thing.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have for this ED Extra session. Please do join me in giving a huge thank you to Celli and Ariel for their time and for their insights. And also thank you Climate School for sponsoring.
Thank you.